So this is Wandering Winder back with the second half of my Renaissance review. Well, whenever you're watching this video, in this video, we are going to be looking at the projects, and I assume they're called projects because I project that they're going to be pretty good on average. Actually, they're called projects probably, but whatever. They're projects that you can, anyway, whatever. I should explain what a project is. Basically, the simplest way is probably they're events that you can only get once. It's basically what they are. Um, so basically, they are landscapey things. They're not technically cards by the rules of the game. So things that affect gain a card, you can't gain them. They don't go in your deck. You have a little cube. You actually have two of them that you can put on one of these things, and that indicates that you have it, and you get its benefit for the rest of the game. Um, yeah. So Um, you only get two cubes, you can only get two of these, but if you're playing with the normal randomizer rules, there can only be up to max of two of these anyway, so that's not going to make a big difference. Um, yeah, what else is there to know? They take a buy and they cost some money. I don't know. Anyway, they're basically like events that you can only get once, like inheritance. Um, so, let's go, shall we? Shall we? Academy. Costs 5 when you gain an action card plus a villager. So if you get this, then you can get a lot of terminals and disregard their terminal collision the first time for all of them, and you get one village. You can disregard the next terminal. I mean, this is the other thing, right? I gain an action, and that I don't have to use it for that action. I don't need to use the villager for that action. I can use it before that. So, like, I can ironworks up an action to make it into a village, to make the ironworks into a village. This seems like one of the better cases for this. In general, I'm not super high on this, mostly because of the opportunity cost. Five, there's a lot of really good five costs, and usually want five, like, usually want them. You usually want a lot of them. And like as a source of, I'm going to be playing a lot of actions and I need to be able to do that consistently, the villagers, like I talked about in my previous video, I don't think are going to be consistent there. So again, I think this is a little bit more of a grease the wheels mechanic, like everything could kind of run without it. Maybe this helps you get off with getting the terminals faster instead of the villages, but I don't think it's the biggest deal ever. Um, in particular, like, you should get a couple terminals before you get at least one terminal before you would get this. I think. Um, Maybe that's not the case, but if I get the terminal, then I play the terminal, and it can't ever collide. I never need the villager, so I have to have at least two terminals before this makes any sense at all. And if I'm getting very few, then having the villagers doesn't seem worth it generally. I don't think this is that great, but I'm sure it's going to have a place. Um, but it seems on the weaker end to me. Barracks, at the start of your turn, +1 action. Well, this seems more good. That's a really awesome phrasing construction, Wandering Winder. You sure know how to talk good. Um, so, despite my not well phrasing, geez, I'm really cracking it today. Um, the so this is, you could compare it to Lost Arts. Lost Arts, you need a stack of the same thing, and you need to have that early on to be getting your plus actions. This, you get your extra action at the start of every turn. Um, it's kind of like having a schemed village always. Eh? But you get to scheme it. Hooray. It doesn't take up a card in your deck, so it's like slightly better in the face of discard attacks than a schemed village. Anyway, um, so when you're trying to draw your deck, uh, if you run the math, one of the biggest downfalls for that kind of a deck is, um, well, you need to have a village in your opening hand if you're doing it with terminal draw, right? If I'm doing a village smithy combination to draw my deck, some village variant, some terminal draw variant, um, you gotta start with a village. So you usually need a lot of villages to be able to start with a village. This means you don't have to start with a village. You can start with a draw card. So that helps your reliability a good bit. It costs 6 and a buy, so that's like fairly hefty. Nice use of like there, Wandering Winder. Your language skills are really on point today. Um, anyway, if you're not doing that kind of a thing, it's hard to imagine. Is it hard to imagine? Maybe you can also do this thing in a money-ish kind of deck, except instead of trying to draw a lot, you're just stuffing your deck full of lots and lots of terminals, and you can get away with 2 colliders. But the thing is, by the time you're getting away with 2 colliders often enough for this to be worth it over, say, a gold, like you're going to have triple collisions reasonably often, I think. So I'm not super sold on this in that kind of a deck. I think probably the best use case of it is to, again, the grease the wheels kind of thing, but really up your reliability when you're trying to draw everything, and so you don't necessarily have to have a village at the start, um, which seems like pretty good up to your reliability, but 6 and a buy is kind of expensive. So I think this will have, again, a place, but this one doesn't seem particularly overpowered to me. Canal. During your turns, cost 7. During your turns, cards cost 1 less. Cards, again, just cards. So not these, not events. Cost 1 less, but not less than 0. So that's like the highway or bridge text. That's really strong, but obviously you'd only get one of these. So only getting one of these, cost reduction is usually the strongest. You want to combine it. First of all, you want to combine it with extra gains for it to be stronger. You generally, it's also, the play pattern ends up being you want a lot of them. This can only get you one. So effectively what this does is it makes you a money every turn if you're buying one thing or gaining one thing, which is fine. Like a money deck probably takes that, honestly, over gold on 7. Right, you think about a gold is going to, well, the gold thickens your deck, so that's something, but your gold is going to make you 3 money over the course of a shuffle. By the time you're hitting 7, 1 money per turn is usually at least 3 money over the course of a shuffle. It's spread out, and then the thickness of your deck, it's like it's reasonably comparable, but I think the cost reduction is a little better for most money decks. So it's fine to good there. It's distributed more than a gold would be, which has pros and cons and whatever. So it's fine if not spectacular for a money deck. But if you have multiple gains going on, right? If I gain 2 things that are cost related, so I buy 2 things or some cost, it turns my workshops into being able to gain 5s is a big deal. If I gain 2 things, it's made me 2 money. If I gain 3 things, it's made me 3 money, etc., etc. Obviously, there's diminishing returns if you are getting stuff that costs 0 already, because it then doesn't reduce. So that's diminishing. Not as big a deal with Canal, though, as it would be with, like, Bridge. I play 4 bridges, but what I really wanted to buy originally cost 3, so I'm not getting as much effect out of the 4th bridge. Anyway, point being, I think this is a solid card. You really want extra gains to make it better, but it's producing some extra money for you, right? Which is pretty good. It does it every turn. You don't have to play a card for it. Not having to play a card for it's kind of a big deal, especially if you're trying to get your draw up and running. Peddler, it's like having a highway, which is kind of like having a peddler. Having a free peddler on all your turns is pretty good. If you're gaining multiple things, it's then like a conspirator. Grand Market without the buy. Grand Market goes really well with it. Yeah, anyway, extra buys and gains really capitalize on this, but it's probably fine as is, even with just one gain per turn. So that makes it pretty good because often you're going to be wanting to have extra buys and extra gains and stuff. And if the base case is it's pretty good, um, then with the extra gains it's going to be a lot better. Where it suffers, I guess, a bit is if you're drawing your deck every turn and still only have one buy or one gain. In that case, it's kind of just adding like a peddler to your deck, which is still not the worst thing ever, but probably not worth going for. So either you want to not be seeing much of your deck or you want to be getting multiple gains for this to be good, but you know, one of those two things is usually going to be true, so I think this is pretty good. Okay, capitalism. Now this is one of the crazy ones. During your turns, actions with plus coin amounts in their text are also treasures. So first of all, this adds extra types to stuff. I guess that goes well with bank or counterfeit, maybe. Stuff that cares about you having the actual treasure type. There isn't that much that cares about the treasure type. Bank is the biggest one that comes to mind. But of course, the bigger thing is that, well, all your terminal actions that have plus coin in them can turn into effectively non-terminals that you can even draw dead, right? So, well, for one thing, you can build a deck that's trying to draw a lot with fewer villages, because you could just play all of your terminal payload cards. Not all of them, but most of them are going to have plus coin in them. Even some of the draw cards have plus coin in them, but I digress a little bit. You play most of your terminal payload cards. Note that it doesn't work with coffers, so keep that in mind because coffers are kind of a theme of this set. Anyway, many, if not most, of your terminal payload cards basically turn into non-terminal, which can be pretty crazy. Again, if there's a large drawing component to these cards, then it's a little bit less good. Just because anything that you're drawing which would be more like drawing is not as bad as some of the stuff I talked about yesterday, because if what you're drawing is like, I'm playing a grand market, I can draw another grand market and still play that. I can draw, you know, my monument and still play that, because that's also a treasure here. So it's much less of a downside than some of the stuff where you're playing actions in your buy phase that I talked about yesterday, or I recorded it yesterday, but in the previous video, whenever you happened to watch it, that was talking about the kingdom cards. Anyway, so capitalism, yeah. So, but still, like, you know, it's not going to be, I go to my buy phase, I play grand market, then I draw my smithy. Like, the smithy isn't going to be something I can play then. So if I can't draw my deck because it ran out of actions too soon, this isn't entirely going to save me from that. Having said that, if all I'm drawing is more grand markets, then I'm golden. Or, you know, mountebanks or swindlers or whatever your payload cards are, that they're like that. Some payload cards that you might want to play don't have this, and so if you're trying to play around capitalism, then maybe you don't play with as many of those cards. There's some kind of anti-synergy there, because the other, I guess the big thing that I'm trying to get to here is, usually if you're trying to draw your deck every turn, and that's your game plan, you want to draw your deck first and then play all your payload. This means you have to have fewer villages for your payload, which is nice. But if it's a terminal draw and villages thing to draw your deck, you know, village and smithy kind of combination, then usually for reliability purposes you want to have extra villages anyway to maintain yourself being reliable. And so turning your terminal payload into non-terminal isn't as good as you might think, because you need fewer villages to support the terminals, but in order to build to be reliable, you usually want to have the villages anyway. So, not that this is worthless there, and it still can be good there. But I think it's not as good as you might think at first glance in those cases because it looks busted at first glance in those cases. I still think there's other things that it enables that are going to be like quite strong. Like I can get a couple of terminal payload cards, and then I get Capitalism, and I can just buy all the terminals and not worry so much about drawing, but play a good stuff kind of deck with all the terminals and maybe one or two draw cards, so that like because if I have a smithy and then I have all this terminal stuff which I would normally draw dead, I'm not drawing it dead, um, because I can just play it as a treasure, right? Um, so that's a strong thing, I think. You know, I get a smithy, and then I get a capitalism, and then I get some mountebanks and some swindlers and some bridges and some whatever it is that you want. All of those that I want. With a treasure type, I can play them during my buy phase. So that seems pretty good. There's all kinds of like combos with it, so I think this is going to be quite strong, but maybe not quite as strong as you might think in the traditional kind of I'm going to draw my deck and then play my stuff. Although I should note that if the way that you're drawing your deck is non-terminal in nature, then this is still really good there because it lets you get away with not having villages there, which, like, if you don't need them for your draw, then this is amazing. So, like, if you're drawing with labs or hunting parties, or maybe not so much hunting parties, but, you know, well, I mean, hunting parties still great. But if I'm just drawing a bunch with labs and stuff, my non-terminal draw, and this is fantastic. Um, if I'm not counting on these things to be draw for me, basically, and if I don't need the villages to help my draw. Cathedral is also really interesting. Costs only 3 at the start of your turn to hash a card from your hand. So this is like you're playing a junk dealer upgrade. You don't get the benefit of the money or the upgraded card from your junk dealer upgrade, but you're playing that every turn at the start of every turn, which is really strong. Really strong, especially because you get this on turn 1. The only potential problem is that it's mandatory. So you're basically always starting with choose your best 4 out of 5 cards. You're starting with a smaller hand. So that's kind of sucky, but the trashing like more than makes up for that in most cases. At least where there isn't other strong trashing. I don't know how it compares to other strong trashing. It doesn't go well with other strong trashing because the other downside is the trashing is not optional. It's mandatory. So eventually if you run out of junk in your deck, it's like the masquerade problem a little bit. Like if you run out of junk in your deck, you're going to start having to trash good cards. Now, maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not. I think it often comes down to if there are additional gains. If there's no additional gains, first of all, getting so thin is less good in games where there's no additional gains. Second of all, if there's the other point about additional gains is if there's additional gains and they're plentiful enough, you can just start gaining some extra junk to trash. Part of the problem with that plan is like your deck ends up big enough that, like with Masquerade, you can't reliably necessarily have junk in your starting hand, so it's a little bit risky there. I think the trashing is still going to make this very strong in very many cases, just because, you know, trashing so strongly from so early, because there's going to be a turn 1 buy a lot of the time. It's very strong, it speeds you up so much. But you need to keep in mind the biggest thing, and actually I think this is going to be the case for some of the other mechanics in the set too with villagers and stuff eventually. Uh, they can speed you up a lot early on. The thing that you just have to watch out for is eventually your deck starts to fall apart. You can't maintain that deck forever, which is unlike what we've seen most of the time before. Most of the time when you're building, you can continue to build in such a way that you can basically continue to have your deck get stronger and stronger over time, and your deck usually gets a little bit less reliable, but you add enough extra draw and stuff to your deck that it's still on the average getting significantly stronger as the game goes on, and you're only limited by piles running out, or, you know, eventually needing to score points. Whereas with these, you know, villagers and this stuff that you have to continually trash, eventually your deck will cannibalize itself and just start to function very poorly. So that's something you have to watch out for. Basically, it means you need to have a plan to end the game, which is something that money decks usually need to do. because their decks stall out and can't hit 8 anymore or whatever, if that's their goal. Whereas the drawing decks usually can, because they're drawing, add the extra drawing stuff to maintain and continue to get stronger and stronger over time. With some of the mechanics in this set, including Cathedral, that's less the case. You need to have a plan to end the game before your deck falls apart. Having said that, I think in many, if not most cases, you can have a plan to end the game before your deck falls apart. So a lot of these things are still at least reasonably good, somewhat depending on the actual thing. But in the case of Cathedral here, I think it's very strong, probably. I haven't mathed it out, but I think probably getting this and setting it up is pretty strong. I'm not sure. My gut tells me it's still a bit weaker than the strongest of the other trashing. Chapel, donate. Although you only have to get this once and then can just start building and your trashing is going to be taken care of, you're not trashing quite as fast with this, so I don't know. I think if you do get this, getting other trashers is a bit suspect, unless you're getting extra junk added somehow. But even then, other mandatory trashers is a bit suspect. If it's like you may trash cards as part of the effect, then probably fine. This probably doesn't work so well, for instance, with Altar or something, though. Anyway, it seems incredibly powerful. Citadel costs 8. The first time you play an action during each of your turns, play it again afterwards. Seems very good. Seems really good. You need to obviously, for it to actually be good, you need to be playing actions on probably most of your turns. But even in a money-ish kind of deck where I have a decent number of actions, I'm usually going to be playing an action most turns. Getting this over my first province is going to make getting more provinces a lot easier. Even let's say I just have like a few terminal silvers in my deck. I hit, say I have 3 terminal silvers in my deck. I hit 8. I buy this. Then every shuffle, it's like it's making 6 money for me because it doubles each of the terminal silvers. So it actually looks like very strong in that case. Yeah, I mean, obviously the terminal silvers can collide or whatever, so maybe you're only making 4, but like it's significantly better than gold. You also get the benefit of whatever the terminal silver does that's not just being a terminal silver. If you're trying to draw, then, it works as a village turns your village into a lab, so you can play extra. Turns your lab into a village. What am I saying? It also turns your village into a lab. Like, it helps your draw. You can't play a smithy first usually, so it doesn't help your draw quite that much. It more helps with getting your action, your plus action up. So that's a little bit awkward because usually you want to be playing a village first. You need to be playing a non-terminal first almost always. With villagers, I should point out, then you can play your smithy first and have that biggest boon there. Boon not in the game sense, but it's just a word I use, okay? Sorry. Anyway, this looks very, very strong. But maybe, again, as I've been saying for the theme here, and maybe I'm just biased because I do tend to like these decks more than I'm just going to draw everything. Seems maybe even a little bit stronger relatively for the decks that are playing good stuffish more than the decks that are trying to draw themselves up. I should say, despite these power differences, the decks that try to draw everything kind of are inherently more powerful in many, if not probably most. No, let me just say, in most cases, not all cases, but most cases, the decks that just try to draw everything and play everything every turn have the higher power level because they ramp up faster once you get to the point where they are drawing themselves. So, like, I'm not saying though these cards are better for the good stuff or money-ish kind of decks that it's going to make them better than the draw your whole deck kind of thing, because even if it's better for them, just the nature of the draw your whole deck thing being more powerful to begin with is still going to probably usually overweigh some of these things being relatively better for the money-ish kind of decks. But maybe some of them will push you a little bit more towards the money-ish things sometimes. We'll see. I'm interested to see, and I'm going to be having a lot of fun playing with them, I hope. Obviously, first impressions, bit colored, I guess. I don't mean that as a racial colored remark. I mean more like a rose tinted glasses. Um, um, okay, City Gate costs 3. At the start of your turn, plus a card, then put a card from your hand onto your deck. This is something that I think really so several of the other things have worked in, kind of either way. But I think this kind of thing is really going to be much better um, for the good stuff, the money-ish kind of decks. Basically, decks that aren't drawing any cards, this is going to be a lot more beneficial because you get the selection. Um, so if you are drawing cards on your turn, effectively what this does is you get to look 6 cards deep to find the cards you need. So it makes you a little bit more reliable. You got to look 6 cards deep in your opening hand, but you're drawing that card you put back anyway. Whereas if you're playing a money-ish kind of deck, it's like how Courtyard for money is better than Smithy for money, even irrespective of their costs. You get this smoothing effect. So the smoothing effect is really good in a money-ish kind of deck because you want to hit your price points exactly and not waste your money. Whereas the draw your deck kind of thing, you're not wasting your money because you have all the extra buys and you have exactly all of your money every turn, so you're not wasting very much money. The money-ish kind of decks, you might waste your money depending on how good the relative price points are. So you need to know, is hitting a 5 over a 3 worth having 2 money in this hand as opposed to the next hand? Depends on the 5 and depends on the 3. 7 versus 6, like the 6 is almost always going to be better. You got to stick some money back. 6 versus 5, often the 5 is going to be better. You got to stick some money back for next turn. I need 8 now. I can stick my green card back. So it gets the smoothing effect, which is really, really, really good in money decks. So I think it's going to be pretty strong there. The difficulty about this, and I guess to some extent with a lot of such cards, and again, I should say the money decks that aren't drawing more than the money decks that are. But the difficulty about this, and maybe all of these projects or many of these projects for money decks, is like the opportunity cost of spending 3 and a buy on this is potentially higher in a money deck. I don't think you can do this from the very start of the game because just losing out on that silver at the start of the game for a money deck is a really big deal. So I don't think you can do it from the start of the game in a money deck. But maybe as early as turn 3 or 4, or more likely, I'm guessing turn 5 or 6, you can pick this up on a low money hand. It also, again, obviously smooths out terminal collisions and stuff for that kind of a deck. So the effect is really good there, and less good in the drawing decks, but a little extra reliability if you have a spare 3 running around. It's like comparable to getting a scheme or a guide or something. A little bit. It's kind of in that range for the drawing decks, I think. Anyway, let's move on. Crop rotation. At the start of your turn, cost 6. At the start of your turn, you may discard a victory card for +2 cards. So it's like a mini Shepherd effect. Obviously, this is going to be a lot better when you actually have victory cards in your starting hand that you can do this with. But it seems really, really good if you do. That's assuming that the victory cards aren't doing like good stuff for you anyway. If they're dual type victory cards, so less good if you're discarding your mill. I mean, it's some value to discard your mill and draw 2 cards, because probably lab is better than what your mill was going to be. And I guess you can redraw the mill later, maybe. Again, similar thing with like harem or something, or nobles. But the value of that is less than turning your estate into a lab. So if you have estate trashing and stuff, then this is going to be weaker. If you don't have estate trashing, you're not playing a deck with estate trashing. You're playing, I don't know, let's say one of these money decks again, where you're not trashing your estates. You're not using your estates. This is also, I guess, weaker with actual like Shepherd or Crossroads, right? Probably because having the green cards in your hand. I don't know. Maybe not. Like, it helps you find your Shepherd or your Crossroads, so maybe it's not that much weaker, since those decks also want to have green cards. This wants you to have green cards, so maybe the direct anti-synergy isn't really that bad, because having bigger hand size they like. and having more green cards in deck they like. So I don't know. Um, Maybe it's actually not that really anti-synergistic there, since they both synergize with similar things. Anyway, my point is, you could discard a victory card for +2 cards. Uh, if you have green cards and you're trying to draw a lot of things, this is obviously excellent, since uh, um, if you weren't able to trash your green cards, getting some draw benefit out of them is pretty good, pretty big deal. Um, if you're also playing, again, one of these money-ish kind of decks, then you have to build a little bit differently, because you're more likely to have terminal collision if you would build it the same or normally. But you can do that. Well, let's say you get this off twice in a shuffle, because 3 times is going to be a little bit hard, because you're going to have multiple green cards in the same hand, or when you discard an estate, then you're going to have, draw one of these estates off that, or in your new 6-card hand that you have. So let's say you get it off twice per turn. So effectively, you're turning 0 value card into twice the average card value in your deck. You're doing it twice per turn. Even from the start of the game, that's better than gold. So this is going to be really good for those kinds of decks. Assuming that they don't need to have a ton of terminals, especially because you can get fewer terminals because of this. So I think this is really good for those kinds of decks. Obviously, it's going to, trigger more shuffles. Those kind of decks also have more of a prolonged greening phase, so you're going to get it off 3 times, because you're going to have a province or 2 in your deck or something. So yeah, I think this card is going to be, or this project is going to be really excellent in many, if not all, but most decks where you haven't trashed all your green cards. Basically almost all decks where you haven't trashed all your green cards. Sometimes you trash all your green cards and maybe that's just better than this, because you don't have to draw them anyway. But yeah, this seems excellent. You do have to have it in your starting hand, so if you're trying to draw a lot, that's less likely to get, not really less likely to get an advantage out of this. It just depends on what, fraction of your starting cards are green, I guess, mostly. Let's move on to Exploration. Costs 4, and it says at the end of your buy phase, if you didn't buy any cards, plus a coffers and plus a villager. So the big combo here is events and other projects, since they don't count as buying cards because they're not cards. You get a little bit of money, you get the extra villagers. The other big combo is gaining stuff instead of buying stuff. On the other hand, I think you usually want to buy something. This effect is not that great for skipping buying stuff. So if you have some other way of, I guess the other big combo is debt. If you're paying off debt, then you get a little bit of extra money and the extra villager to grease you. So that's like kind of nice. But in most cases, you want to be buying something at least almost every turn, if not every turn, which makes this seem not that great. Now, the villagers maybe is enough value in some cases where you're so hungry for extra actions, you're going to take some turns off. And that's not going to be very common, I don't think, but it might happen. But if we're just looking at the money side of it, kind of takes 4 turns of not buying any cards to make up for this. Presumably it's only 3 turns beyond this, because I'm going to pick this up and recoup one of the money then. So I don't think this one's great. I should note that if you're late enough and you have just a 4 money hand, it's a way to buy a coffers for 4 money, buy a coffers and a villager for 4 money. So in the good stuff kind of decks, then maybe you tactically get this near the end because you had 4, and well, getting an estate isn't that great for you, and having the coffers is better, and having the villager, maybe I know that I'm going to need the villagers my next turn. Maybe I get it tactically early because it's there's 5 cards left in my deck, and I know there's 2 terminals, so whatever I'm getting with my 4 right now is not that great, and I want to be able to play both my terminals next turn, so I'm going to buy this to get the villager, and maybe it'll give me some extra money, extra villagers later on. So I think that's going to be used for this. It's going to be much more of a tactical play than I'm going to build around this play. And I think because usually there's going to be something better at 5. I think you're rarely going to buy this except when you have exactly 4 to spend on it, but sometimes you will. And if there are other events that are particularly good, then it can be excellent. So like with alms, it's great because you just open this on your 4, hopefully you get your 4 first, and then you alms, 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 which you often alms a lot anyway. And every time you alms, um, you get an extra coffers and a villager. So first of all, the extra villagers means you can be almsing for terminals, and the extra money means that like you're building up for towards the end game. So that seems like a very powerful combination. There's going to be some other really strong combinations as well. Um, this is maybe good in like Workshop's Garden kind of rush, um, where you can maybe Silk Road more than Gardens, because Gardens you still usually want to buy like a copper, even if you have a garbagey hand. But anyway, um, it can help you turn that into a slog where you like, let's say I'm playing Workshop Silk Road and this. Obviously, that's 3 card combos, so it's not going to come up much. And it's very narrow. I think the tactical play is going to be by far the most useful thing. Events are also going to be pretty useful with it. Debt, maybe, but like, you need to get this first. The tactical play, I think, is the biggest thing, and I don't think this is super strong, but hear me out. I'm just brainstorming, spitballing this Workshop Silk Roads. I open this and Workshop, and I get a few more workshops where I'm not getting too much value out of this. And then I just start workshopping Silk Road, and I don't buy anything. I just workshop Silk Road, I don't buy anything, workshop Silk Road, I don't buy anything, workshop Silk Road, I don't buy anything. Then at some point I can buy a province and keep workshopping my Silk Roads. I'm going to have 4 or 5 workshops or something. I can play multiples of them because I have all these villagers that I'm storing up. I can buy a province or two. Okay, that doesn't actually even seem all that good. Whatever, okay. Mostly it's the tactical thing. Let's move on. Fair. Unfair card. No, it's actually quite a fair card. Start of your turn plus buy. Yeah, often decks that want more than 1 buy want more than 2 buys, so like this doesn't seem like it's going to solve all your problems, but maybe the plus buy cards are kind of bad. Maybe it's the only plus buy thing, in which case, hey, being able to get 2 buys might be a big deal. Other than that, I think the other big use case for it is going to be if there's like some 2 costs that you really want to be getting a lot of, then you can get this reasonably early and start chowing down on the 2s because you're going to have, an extra buy every turn. If there's some cheap card that you want a lot of, basically. But because that makes this more useful early, or if it's the only plus buy. Sometimes it's like, a market square that you play every turn. If you're drawing your deck, it's fine. Like, you could just get it as one of your extra buys and it doesn't take up a card slot. It's probably fine, but it's not going to be particularly good. I don't think, except in the cases where, so this is a non-terminal source of buy, is like a marginally decent, useful thing. But the biggest cases are going to be, it's the only plus buy, and so it lets you get 2 buys instead of 1. Or there's some cheap thing that you want to get a lot of relatively early on, in which case this is there for you. Fleet. After the game ends, costs 5. After the game ends, there's an extra round of turns just for players with this. So this seems not as strong to me as a lot of people seem to think that it is. It really depends on why the game is ending, and yeah. So the big deal is how many points you can actually score after the game ends. You have 1 round of turns to score as much as you can basically on that exact turn, or on those exact turns. If the game ended on provinces, then you're stuck with only getting duchies or whatever alt VP there is left. So if there's a lot of that, then this is like quite good. If the game ended on piles, then it gives them an extra turn to, score a lot of points. You can't just pile out because, well, they're still going to have another turn to score a lot of points. So the pile out thing, it probably changes the dynamic in a lot of ways that I haven't worked out yet. And it's a little bit hard for me to think without thinking about it in much depth, because do I want to pile out? Because sometimes you still will, because you want to just say, okay, we're on one turn each now, and that's good for me in comparison to you. Other times it's going to be less important. Ending the provinces is going to make this not that good in a lot of cases, but sometimes you can still score a lot of other points. If you're winning effectively by getting half the VP, or making it so that they have to get like 7 or 8 estates to get half the VP, then that seems less good. Estate pileouts, I guess, are the biggest thing that this, maybe not the biggest thing, but a big thing that this hurts, because now on this extra turn my deck is garbage because I added all these estates to my deck, and I'm not outscoring you by a lot if I piled out estates, probably. The interesting thing is, when do you get this? Because you really don't want to get it until you have to. Because it doesn't help your deck. It doesn't hurt your deck, so maybe you get it instead of a duchy at some point or something. You get it instead of a green card, because it doesn't hurt your deck like a green card, and it's going to score you more points than a green card would. Like, I'm going to get this even in a 1 game per turn kind of game. I'm going to get this instead of a duchy in some to a lot of cases, because it lets me, assuming even if the provinces run out, if there's still a duchy left, I can probably at least get a duchy on that turn. And in the meantime, this wasn't clogging my deck up like the duchy would have. So it seems like something that's usually going to be gotten. But if all I'm doing is replacing a duchy and then I end up re-getting the duchy, then it's not doing that much for me, because it's just slightly skewing. And obviously, depending on the kinds of decks, maybe it's a little bit risky whether I'll even be able to get a duchy in that extra turn. On the other hand, if there's multiple gains, then usually I'm going to be able to score better than a duchy. And it's just a little bit of a game of chicken on, I want to make sure I have this before the game ends, but I don't want to get it too early, or my deck quality is going to be too much worse than yours. So you want to hold off kind of as long as possible. It's similar to getting green cards in some respects, but it's a little bit less bad for your deck than green cards. Discourages your opponent on piling out with an extra point in a way that isn't necessarily beneficial to their deck. It's going to be really strong. Both players are going to get it, I think, most of the time. Guildhall. When you gain a treasure, plus a coffers. Yeah, this really looks better in money decks, since money decks are a lot happier to have treasures, and money decks are generally happier with coffers. So this seems a lot better in money decks than decks that are trying to draw a lot, and it seems pretty good in money decks. Again, it's not like the Power 5, oh my gosh, I don't think. So let's say, you get this, it doesn't do anything for you in your deck, but every turn you buy silver, it effectively comes with 1 extra money to spend. Every turn that you, I don't know, that's actually pretty good for a money deck. Maybe it's worth just slamming as your first 5 in a lot of cases. It's probably not as good as like the really strong 5s for a money deck. You're not going to get it over Mountebank or Cultist or Witch. Probably even something like Butcher is going to be better than this, but I think it's probably kind of next tier below that. If you have some way of gaining like a bunch of treasures, then it could be really good. I slam Guildhall, and then a couple turns later I hit 7 and buy a Masterpiece and overpay by 4. I get 5 coffers. I'm probably kind of set to be able to province pretty reliably now, so that's like not the worst thing ever. Really good with Delve. I slam Guildhall on my first 5. I've just been delving a lot. Maybe I even get some coppers because they come with an extra coffer. At some points, I'm going to get coppers anyway if I have the spare buy. Um, so it's pretty good for money decks, I think. For the other decks, it depends. Treasure's usually not the greatest payload, and it's kind of like when we talked about with spices yesterday. You're making them a little bit cheaper to some respect, um, which is like it's fine, but it's you can't use the money immediately, and like the thing that makes gold not great in the other decks is usually not so much that it costs one too much. The coffer flexibility is still nice, but I think it's more nice in, again, the money decks that like the flexibility more. Wow, I'm taking a long time on these, so let's try to move a little bit faster. Innovation costs 6. The first time you gain an action card in each of your turns, you may set it aside. If you do, play it. So, yeah, this is a little bit weird. Again, some of the stuff I talked about yesterday with playing certain kinds of actions in your buy phase. If you're the first time you're gaining an action card, it's because you're buying it. Then this is mostly good when you're buying payload cards and you're buying them first. And if that's what you're doing, it's also not going to be good if you don't have extra buys. So usually you're going to want to do this when you have extra buys and you're buying a payload card, and or if you have gains. So I'm playing Workshop Gardens. I workshop a Gardens instead of workshopping a Gardens, so I get a free workshop. Hooray! Ironworks Gardens, same thing, right? So, okay, those are the rushes, but even in general, I get to workshop. I automatically get to gain and play my action. So that's kind of nice. It gives you reliability in that case as well. So I think the real power with this is with the gainers, but if there's some kind of like plus buy payload that you want as well, it's okay there also. Just not as good. It's like, if I buy a Grand Market with this, let me make sure I didn't just mute myself because I hit a thing. Okay, it looks like I didn't mute myself. If I buy a Grand Market with this, it's like the Grand Market costs 4, kind of, because I get and it didn't cost the buy because I get the buy back, and I get 2 money back, and I draw a card, which if it's not a treasure doesn't do much for me, which is like, it's fine. It makes it's like putting a fairy on the Grand Markets, kind of, sort of. Again, drawing treasure actually also at this point doesn't help anything because I've already started buying stuff. So the draw just doesn't do anything. The villages don't do anything. It has to be a payloady kind of card. So really it's mostly the gainers and a little bit the, like woodcutter kind of effects. Having said that, with the gainers, it's probably rather good. Just helping you be more reliable because you get to do the gain and play. But I think on overall, it's probably going to be overrated because you have to play it right then. It's not like set it aside and play it at the start of your next turn. Anyway, pageant 3 cost at the end of your buy phase. Excuse me. You may pay 1 money for +1 coffers. Yeah. So when I first read this, I thought you could do this any number of times. When I thought you could do it any number of times, I thought it was completely broken because that would be completely broken. Even just money with just this and only the basic cards, you're like getting provinces every turn starting turn 9 or something pretty reliably. Maybe you can't get 8 that way, but if you start turn 10, you can get 8 that way, I think. And that was just spitballing like the first thing off the top of my head. So that would have been incredibly good. As it is, you can only do this once per turn, so it's a lot less good. This kind of effect, again, is usually a lot better in money. But again, taking the time to do this is tougher in money. Similar to the exploration, this might be something you do tactically when you have exactly 4, and the silver or whatever the 3 cost isn't that good for you. I guess maybe if just the 3 cost isn't that good for you. I think this one's maybe a little bit better. Well, it's weird. It doesn't give you the villagers, so if the villagers are important, it's going to be worse. Otherwise, I think this one might be a little bit better for the drawing decks because saving a little bit of money is still pretty good there. But I think it's going to be similar to exploration in a lot of cases. That a lot of times, in your moneyish kind of decks, you can smooth a little bit, and having the coffers helps you smooth a little bit. So that's nice, but the opportunity cost of it is the biggest detractor. You probably will get it at some point, and if you get it maybe turn 3, 4, again, I think more likely turns 5, 6 when you have just a small amount of money, 3 or 4, then being able to do that for the rest of the game is going to help kind of significantly. In other decks, when you have some spare money or whatever, it helps you convert future spare money into storable spare money, which is nice but not the greatest. Okay. Piazza. Mike. Cost 5 at the start of your turn. Reveal the top card of your deck. If it's an action, play it. Well, note that this is reveal and not discard, so it's a little bit different from Vassal that way. But it needs to be an action for this to do anything, which means you need to have a pretty high density of actions or somehow be able to make the 6th card in your deck every turn be an action, which is pretty hard to make the 6th card be an action. Like if you have Casey Scheme or something, then sure you can do that maybe. But if you have Casey Scheme going on, then does it really matter that you have this? Probably not. So usually you're just trying to jam a bunch of extra actions in, and if you actually do get this off, it's vaguely kind of sort of like a Lost City, where you drew up to a 6-card hand and then played that action that you're playing every turn, like a Prince Lost City, which is obviously quite good. But I don't know how often your deck is action dense enough. Probably in a lot of decks where you're getting to have a lot of actions. I don't know how often this needs to hit for it to be good. It's a little bit hard to rely on because you're not going to be like 100%. I think usually you're only getting to like 70 or 80% actions in most of those decks. Sometimes it's really high, but I'm a little bit skeptical of this because I don't know how reliable it's going to be, and like if you're building one of those draw my deck kind of decks, then relying on this is a little bit iffy. And if you're not relying on it, then it's not doing so much in those kind of decks because you're trying to draw everything anyway. So I'm a little bit skeptical of this. It's probably still good, if it hits 70% of the time. So it's probably still good, but also in those kinds of decks, a Lost City is not that much different than a Lost City that you can play every turn. Of course, Lost City is a good card, so it's probably reasonable to good, but not the completely busted, but pretty good in the right deck where you have a ton of actions. If you don't have a ton of actions, I don't think it's very good. Road Network. Whenever another player gains a victory card plus a card. This is really weird. I don't know how to evaluate this very well. My gut tells me it's probably not that good, since usually you're not greening towards really late, and by really late your deck's probably already pretty good. If you can get this right before they start greening, then you're going to draw an extra card like every turn or two, in which case, if you draw an extra card is like at the start of your turn, and effectively between turns is like the start of your turn, then like that's good, I guess. It's like having a lab, but I don't think this is a very good project because well, usually you're going to have your draw up by then, or I don't know. I guess what it's good against is these kind of like green card rushes, where like if I'm rushing for my Ironworks Gardens or whatever, then you're drawing a bunch of extra cards. So it's good against that. Having said that, costing 5 is kind of a big deal. And I think the opportunity cost is going to be high enough that this isn't going to be very good that often. Could be wrong, though. I mean, the effect is potentially powerful. Drawing extra cards is good, but yeah. Sewers. When you trash a card other than with this costs 3, you may trash a card from your hand. Yeah, so mass trashers like Chapel, this is completely terrible with. Because, like, the thing that's holding Chapel back is that it can only trash 4 cards and not 5, right? No. Um, sometimes you're trashing cards that aren't from your hand, and you'd like to be able to trash cards from your hand, I guess. So like it pairs up with your opponent's trashing attacks, kind of. Not really that much. The bigger deal, I think, is more when you have your one-off trashers, your junk dealers, your upgrades, your foragers, your lookouts, that kind of a thing. This lets you like double up on that, which isn't as good as you might think because you usually still want to be buying stuff, trashing a couple cards from your hand. Maybe with Remake, this lets you trash 4 cards instead of 2. That's something. Or with Steward, it lets you trash 3 cards instead of 2. But you're not buying anything then. You're usually not buying anything with Steward anyway. But I think the biggest use case, and it's going to be a little bit overrated maybe, but it's still quite good, is with a card like Forager, especially like Lookout. You get to trash an extra card from your hand. That's pretty good. It's also a may on the trashing from your hand, so you don't have to, so that's nice. It helps you thin down faster. Like you could go Lookout, or you could go this Lookout, and I think this Lookout is usually going to be a little bit better. Maybe you get 2 Lookouts anyway, and this is just better than the third, but it lets you trash down faster, I think, than getting like an extra one of those one-off trashers usually. Certainly by the time you're getting 2 of those and you're getting one of these, this is like getting 2 of them, kind of, sort of. So maybe it's not that much better than getting the second Forager. I think it's probably a little bit better than getting the second Forager, but the difference is probably quite marginal. Or a junk. The bigger deal is probably a junk dealer or a sentry, especially sentry. Junk dealer or sentry upgrade. This is cheaper than those, so you get to get extra copies of those cheaper, faster. So that's probably the biggest use case. Forager or Lookout or something is a little bit okay. Trade route, your single off trashers, it helps them be a bit better. But it's not the most fantastic there, especially for the non-terminal ones, because you get an extra one anyway. Doctor, maybe? Anyway, Doctor, this with a Doctor overpay. I'm going to trash 2 cards from my deck and 2 cards from my hand, and then later on it makes my Doctor also be able to trash something from my hand if I have something stuck in my hand, and I can manage to trash something on my deck. So anyway, marginal, but will be good when it's good. Just that's not going to come up very often that it's at least very good. Silos. At the start of your turn, discard any number of coppers revealed, then draw that many cards. Costs 4. So silos, yeah. If there isn't copper trashing, this helps you find your business a lot better. Especially if there's estate trashing and there's not copper trashing, helps you find your business a lot better. So this with Jack of all trades looks like quite strong for money. Because you're going to find a Jack, like this and Jack seems a lot better than double Jack. I'm not sure whether opening this or opening Jack is better, but you're going to trash your estates pretty fast, and then you're going to be finding a lot of silvers in your Jack pretty fast, and so that's going to be a really strong money strategy. If you are trashing your coppers, then this is worthless. But if you are a little bit slow to trash your coppers, or you can't trash your coppers but still want to be playing some other stuff, help getting your draw up, then this can be potentially very strong. So sometimes your trashing is pretty weak, but you still want to be able to draw a lot, but it's going to be a little inconsistent because you have 6 coppers in your deck or something. This is going to help you be a lot more consistent in those cases. Um, your copper trashing is weak, and you just want to be able to play your good terminal or two very often. This is going to help a lot there. Um, it's slow to get to your copper trashing, then you get this on your second shuffle or something, and you get to find your junk dealer, your altar a lot faster. Um, so I think this is going to be a good role player in a lot of cases, and the effect is really strong. Um, Obviously, after a point, or if there's really good copper trashing, then it's not going to be very good. I open donate, then this gets a lot worse if donate's on the board, let's say. But if the trashing is a little bit slower, costs 5 or more or something, or there isn't any good copper trashing, then this can be really, really, really strong. Also, probably at least reasonable in money-ish kind of decks. Sinister Plot, a ploy to start a war. This costs for, at the start of your turn, add a token here, or remove your tokens here for +1 card each. So you buy this, it does nothing when you buy it. The next turn, you're not going to have any tokens on it, so you put a token on it. The next turn, you can either take the token off and draw a card, or put another token on it. If you put another token on it, then the turn after that, there's 2 tokens on it. You can either draw 2 or put another token on it. So this is kind of like the native village draw thing, where it could be every other turn you're drawing an extra card, which is fine, I guess, but you're going to draw more cards per turn overall if you go for one big draw thing. So the reliability of a card every other turn, or a couple cards every turn, is kind of like guide. Pretty good there. Not the greatest thing ever, I guess, because it's going to be wonky. You're not drawing the same amount of cards every turn. I guess if you somehow get like your wharves or caravans a little bit wonky, then this might be able to help you there a little bit, but that seems like kind of marginal. Also kind of rare. I think the bigger deal is that you can play for a mega turn with this, kind of like you can with Native Village. But you're just building a little bit more of a normal deck, and then you have one turn where you draw a bunch of extra cards. The other thing is, it could be for a money-ish deck, you just take the burst of extra money when you need it. I haven't thought about that. I'm not sure how good that is, but it might be useful there. If you're drawing your deck every turn, then having the wonky draw is probably not that great for you, though. So I think the biggest use is a Megaturn deck. Possibly it can be used in a money-ish kind of deck, but that's a little bit tricky because usually you want to have a good number of terminals, and so you're gonna, if you draw a bunch of extra cards, you get terminal collision. But if you draw an extra 2 cards every 3 turns, then maybe that's good enough. I don't know. Lastly, we come to Star Chart. Costs 3. It says when you shuffle, you may pick one of the cards to go on top. The most common use case I can think for this is you're building a draw your deck. You're shuffling just about every turn. You can make sure that you have a village in the start of every turn, or you have a lost city. If there's some particularly good draw card, you gotta have it at the start. It works kind of like a scheme. In fact, very like a scheme in that case. Because it's tied to shuffles, it's not very good in money-ish kind of decks, because, like, effectively what it does is it says, well, there's a couple things. For most of the game, what it's doing is it's saying your best card isn't going to miss the shuffle, which is nice, but your cards missing the shuffle isn't happening that much anyway. Obviously, it depends on how many modulo your cards you have in your deck, sans the drawing cards. So, like, maybe you have 14 cards in your deck exactly, and so there's a 4 in 14 chance that that best card would miss the shuffle. Obviously, it makes every other card more likely to miss the shuffle, so having a card on top of your deck otherwise, sometimes it's going to be useful for, like, Mystic Wishing Well shenanigans, I guess. That's not a very big use. The other thing it does for money-ish decks is, like, your last shuffle. There's a bigger chance that you won't see the good card, because it's not just about missing the shuffle, it's you need to see it before the game ends. Still, I think this is quite marginal for money decks and a reasonable enough pickup for uh, a drawing deck that's trying to draw itself every turn, uh, particularly if it has a really good target, like, let's say, Hunting Party, or I guess Hunting Party, sometimes you are shuffling your deck a lot in a turn. So that's probably the best combo. Um, because you do shuffle your deck a lot in a turn. Maybe Golem also could be a good combo. Um, Although I don't know exactly where you're sticking on top in the Golem case, so I think Hunting Party is probably a better combo. But the bigger case is just like you're drawing your deck every turn, and it's a little bit of extra reliability, kind of like a scheme. Um, in fact, very, very similar to a scheme in that case. Scheme, not that great, so I don't think this is that great either, but like worth getting in a lot of cases. And a combo with, say, Hunting Party. Anyway, that's it for my opinions here. Watch the other video, watch this one. My hot takes, let me know where they're too hot for you, where I'm wrong, get some debate, some discussion going. Anyway, this has been Wandering Winder with my initial impression hot takes on the projects of Dominion Renaissance, and we'll talk to all of you again soon. Thanks for watching.